Why does relationship satisfaction drop for both partners after having children?
I think it's helpful to come in with some pessimism. I like to say it's like you go from having like a fun pal that you can just like go out to dinner with, and all of a sudden you're running like a small business with a single customer who cries all the time.
Why, even when dads are doing more than our fathers ever did, does it still feel like it's not enough?
This image of the kind of like bumbling, hapless, inept dad, like the Homer Simpson, is kind of a predominant way that we look at dads.
What do we believe the job of a mum is? What do we believe the job of a dad is?
We need to be really cautious when we essentialize gender roles in parenting, because kids benefit from getting hugged by their dads and played with by their moms.
Can ideas around masculinity actually help me as a father, or are they things I should be fighting against?
As a culture, we're still kind of figuring out what is the right way to be a man. And I think boys are really confused right now because they've gotten very mixed messages.
Where did these ideas come from? And what happens to our relationships when we try to live up to ideals that were never designed for the lives we're living now? In this podcast, I talk to authors, academics, sociologists, gender experts, and parenting experts to understand what's really happening to couples after they have children and find out if there is a way to be a happier parent. Darby Saxbe is a bit of a legend. She's a professor of psychology. She specializes in neurological changes in the move to parenthood. And her work is referenced by pretty much every author I've interviewed for this show. In her new book, she focuses entirely on, wait for it, dads. Yes, this is such a big deal to have someone so esteemed focusing on fatherhood. We talk about dads struggling to find a role in the early stages of parenthood, and we discuss the really tricky topic of maternal gatekeeping and the high cost it has for fathers. We talk about the inevitable decline in relationship quality that comes with early parenthood and what partners can do to mitigate it. And we talk about the cultural changes in fatherhood, and we bust some myths around how dads are supposed to parent. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I think maybe 15 episodes ago, I realized that every single book that I've read referenced your work. And I was like, I got to go to the source. But, you know, you're the data behind Fair Play. I remember reading a lot of your early studies and being like, which were around the mental load, and being like, okay, great that there's data. I feel like she's only asking mums. I felt like they were really kind of focused on mums. And then when I got in touch with you, you were like, I'd love to talk, but I'm writing this book on dads. Can we wait until I've written the book? And that I was like, oh, that's completely amazing that someone who's so respected is putting their attention on fathers. But also I was like, oh, that's completely jarred with my expectations of what your interests were. So like, how do we get from those studies to this book on dads?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I'm so happy to be here. As I told you, I'm a huge fan of everything you do. And I mean, I think what you do is kind of illustrating why it's important to focus on dads, right? Moms already know about household dynamics. They're already socialized to be parents. They, you know, from girlhood on, kind of imagine what their future families might look like, how they might run their household. And I think dads are not included in a lot of those conversations. And as a result, I think a lot of men struggle, especially around the transition to parenthood, which we know is this kind of risky inflection point for relationship distress. They struggle because they're not quite sure what their roles are, what's expected of them, and are sort of understanding of how men interact in the household and in the family has shifted so much just in the last few decades as women have entered the paid workforce, and suddenly men aren't the sole breadwinners in most families anymore. So their partners may want them to be more engaged. And I think men have old scripts that they were raised with and that they saw from their fathers and grandfathers. And their partners are operating from different scripts, different instruction manual. And I think a lot of dads are just kind of stuck in the middle, not sure how to navigate. So to me, any attempt to change or improve couple functioning or healthy adaptation to parenthood kind of needs to focus on dads because they've been so left out for so long.
My wife said this to me, but it's like we grew up talking about getting married and having families. Like, and it was in the games we played, but also like we practiced our signatures with different people's names. There's just none of that as a boy, teenager, man. It's just not in our mind. I mean, part of that must be to do with the fact that you guys have a different conception window.
I think so. So that's correct that, we only have as women so many reproductive opportunities. We have a limited number of eggs, and pregnancy and birth are calorically, metabolically really, really expensive, right? They cost our body a lot. So the stakes are really high for us, and it's on us to be very selective about who we're partnering with. Whereas males, they can have as many offspring as they have sperm. So in theory, thousands, millions.
A
And
lot.
and so their perspective or they might have different objectives. But the big irony, I think, behind the difference in socialization around marriage is, like you said, like a lot of girls are raised thinking about their wedding dress, whose name they might want to take. And yet we know that actually men benefit more from marriage when it comes to physical health and longevity. So the advantage of being married is actually really great for men, and the cost of being isolated is really high for men. And so if anyone should be raised from boyhood to dream of their future wedding, it should actually be the males.
Yeah, and now we've got this statistic that it's, men are saying that having a family represents success to them in a way that young women aren't saying that. Like we're the ones who want it.
Yeah, there's been this really interesting kind of gender divergence where young women now are less likely to say that they want to have kids. And I think part of that is because some of the discourse around housework inequity and the mental load has just penetrated into the younger generation. And maybe they see their own mother's frustration and they feel like, this is going to be costly for me because I'm not really going to be able to negotiate a fair dynamic with my partner. And I think, again, men are maybe coming a little later to that conversation, which is why what you do is so valuable.
The book starts with an account of your own father, who you have this deep love for. It left a kind of question in my mind the way you wrote that your mum had an affair and they split up, and then you talk about your father after that affair. Is there something here? Is there a kind of like question of, did my dad only become the dad he became because he had to do it on his own? Did that change him?
Hmm. I think that was a big part of it. So, yeah, he was kind of thrown into the deep end. Like, he was a very typical 1980s dad, worked a lot, a little bit checked out. And and yet, he also, and he would say this, like he had the seeds planted in him a little more than some other men. So as a young boy, he was the only boy in his school to take home ec because he really liked cooking and baking. And um, in contrast, my mom was always interested in technology and medicine. So they both had somewhat counter, gender identities for the times in which they were raised in the 60s. But my dad certainly had to go from letting my mom do most of the childcare to suddenly he's alone in the house with the four of us and we're just running wild. And he had to kind of do a little bit of a crash course to be the chief cook, the chief chauffeur, the chief laundry guy. And he actually started to kind of relish those things and be good at them.
Amazing. Yeah, what an amazing thing to kind of to influence your story and the way that you've looked at these things, to be like, it's a little bit like the start of the Incredible Hulk, where Bruce Banner's like, but why? Like, why couldn't I lift the car right? Why did it take that for this man to
Yeah.
kind of lean into all these jobs? Talk to me about, there's a huge part of your book that is devoted to this really understudied thing of what happens to dads in pregnancy, what happens to dads in the early years when they're exposed to children, when they're not exposed to their children, what it does to the way they perceive their relationships. Like, what are the headlines? What are the things that we should really understand?
Yeah, I mean, the first big thing, like you said, basically, is fatherhood is really transformative for men. So we see the visible transformation that a pregnant woman undergoes, right? Like we know that her body has changed, but we don't always appreciate hormones are changing for new dads. The brain is changing, even the structure of the brain, our gray matter volume is changing, it's reducing, and it's becoming more streamlined. And in tandem with that, our mental health risk is shifting, our physical health risk is shifting, and our relationship functioning is changing. So it's, I think, both a time of some opportunity, and a lot of men derive so much joy and purpose from parenthood, but it can also be a time of risk. And I think it's a time that requires a lot of investment, both as individuals, how can we support the parents in our lives, and also in terms of how we think about public policy.
I want to give you a scenario, which is, it's real. It's a very good friend of mine. And one of the bits of pushback that I get from my male friends is that my content doesn't talk enough about how difficult it is to take charge of the mental load. And they want me to talk about maternal gatekeeping more. It's not actually my experience. Eloise wasn't like that. When I stepped up, she was like, "Oh, thank God, here, have some." But,
Sure.
but yeah, oh, sweet. But it does seem to be a very common experience. But my friend was really eloquent about it. He said, "My wife was pregnant for 9 months, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on that baby. And I was in this support role of my wife while she was pregnant and looking after her. And I thought that would switch when the baby came to me being a dad. And I didn't realize that I would still be stuck on the outside of this dyad. And I should have realized it, but because of breastfeeding, because of the trauma that she'd been through, the world we lived in was dictated by her. It was set by her. And also she'd been told that her instincts were more valuable than mine. Her opinions were more valuable than mine. And even as it progressed, it was just such a shock. I hadn't realized that we had different views about the medical community. She would ignore doctor's advice because of something she'd read in a book, and then I'd come with a different book and she'd be like, "No, your book's abusive." And I was just constantly dismissed. And then at the same time, there was this frustration that I wasn't taking charge of more stuff. I just want to talk about that. I think it's such a common thing, and I find it very hard to talk about on social media.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think it's a surprisingly common experience that a lot of dads and couples have. And it's sort of like it's coming from different directions. And I think it's always helpful to think about this when you work with couples. There's never any one person who's the villain and one person who's the victim. It's the dynamic that's gone wrong. People might have the best of intentions, and something about the way they're communicating is breaking down. But for dads to kind of feel a little stranded outside the kind of charmed circle of the mother baby dyad is a really common experience in the first months and years after birth. Because if you think about it, new moms have a big head start. Like, they've had 9 months to acclimate to this baby, and they might feel a profound bond even before the baby's born. They have the pregnancy hormones. If they're breastfeeding, they have the hormones associated with that. And so there's this almost like chemical bond that's there just, right from the first hours. And dads are playing catch up, and they're trying to form their own relationship with the baby, but it's often very mediated through the mom if she's feeding the baby and needs to be there every few hours. Moms also frequently get more time off from work. They are more likely to learn about parenting from other moms. We talked about girls and women being socialized into marriage. We also really socialize girls and women into motherhood. And so every young woman has heard 1,000 birth stories and gotten 1,000 unsolicited tips from other women in the community. And so men are a little behind on all of that, and that's not their fault. But I think where it can go wrong is this phenomenon called maternal gatekeeping, which is where either intentionally or unconsciously, women kind of undermine or block dad's efforts to do more. And it may be just that she feels strongly that she has the right approach because she has honed that through a lot of interaction with the baby. Oh, he'll calm down when I do this. He cries because of this. And so moms really want to be helpful, but it can make the partner feel subtly discouraged from getting involved. Like, if she knows the right way to do it, then how am I helping? And it can make it harder for dads to form their own independent relationship with the baby and really build confidence. And in order for dads to feel fully able to parent, they almost need their own time alone with baby to be in charge. And it's hard to have that when, mom needs to be in proximity in those first months. And I think this is one of the many things it just helps to have a good line of communication. Moms and dads can talk about these things ahead of the birth. They can talk about these things after the birth. I found in my lab, couples are often very poor forecasters of how they're going to divide up baby care. They expect a more egalitarian split before birth than they achieve after birth. So there are a lot of surprises in store, and it's helpful for couples to kind of know what the stumbling blocks might be so that they can hopefully anticipate some of these issues before they come up and start to fester.
Just, I think it's so hard to talk about maternal gatekeeping without it sounding blamey. And just blame just doesn't help anyone. I think it might be useful to talk about what the costs can be because I think that attitude of mum knows best, which we've all been taught, right, our whole lives, it comes at a real cost to the relationship. And you're saying to the father's relationship with the child, like, what is that cost?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time, it can make dads feel shut out. It can make dads feel undermined, like they're not going to be as good at this as their partner. It can discourage them from trying. And I agree, it's really tricky to talk about it because you never want to blame the mom because it's often coming from understandable concern about the baby's welfare,
Yeah, love.
understandable, right, insight that she has into the baby that she wants to share, and it can start out in a very benign way with just her saying, the baby likes it better when you tuck him in like this. But then it can kind of spiral to a point where dad feels like he always needs mom's guidance. And then mom actually gets frustrated, like, why do I have to tell this person what to do? And so it can actually leave both members of the couple feeling a little annoyed with each other. And I mean, the solution is for just everybody to have opportunities to build their own bond with the kid. It might mean that mom needs to try to step back and just work on trusting that her partner can figure it out. And it might mean that things go a little bit wrong. Maybe there's a bottle of diaper cream that comes to the park instead of sunscreen, and the baby comes home with a face that, is white with diaper rash cream and a sunburn. But, those are the kinds of things that through trial and error, we can solve for. So as long as it's not reaching a point where we think the baby's unsafe, then I think it's really good for moms to say, take the baby, take him to the park, take him for a couple hours and see how it goes.
Given all you've said so far, and this, these studies that you're really famous for, that men and women are like, no, we're going to be really egalitarian and we're going to split things half, and it never ever happens, right? It always just comes into mum doing more. You gave a quote in your book from 1957 where someone pointed out that. Can you remember the quote?
I think it was the transition to parenthood is a crisis for couples.
Right. So they've
It's a
known this for
crisis
ages.
for parents. Yeah.
The transition to parenthood is a crisis for couples.
Yeah.
Is that inevitable? Do we have to accept that that is going to happen, and what we need to work on is how quickly we repair it?
I think that's right. I think it's helpful to come in with some pessimism. And, you often hear people say, I am having a hard time with my partner, but maybe having a baby will save the marriage. And the answer for that is, if you're having a hard time now, the last thing you want to do is throw a baby into the mix. And it makes sense that this would be a challenging time for relationships because you have more to think about. You are more sleep deprived. I like to say it's like you go from having like a fun pal that you can just like go out to dinner with. And all of a sudden you're running like a small business with a single customer who cries all the time. So you have a lot of logistics to think about, and you need to rely on your partner to do certain things and not forget. And so people's nerves are frayed. And I think when you know that there's going to be that kind of normative dip in relationship quality, you can be pleasantly surprised. So I was lucky that before having my own kids, I had already done a lot of research on relationship quality.
I'm going to hate you.
Yeah. So I was able to say to my husband during pregnancy, we're probably not going to like each other very much for the next 6 months. And so we were a little bit kind of armed and ready for that. Although I will say I still got so frustrated with him sometimes, and he got so frustrated with me that I don't even think we could have perfectly anticipated. But when you lower your expectations, then I think you give yourself more room to see when things are going right, as opposed to being really disappointed and frustrated when things go wrong.
Such a good point about a baby will save this relationship. It's a really weird instinctive thing we do. And also, the really classic thing of the couples of, it's not going well, let's have another one. That's so much worse. That's worse than the first one. We all do that. I see that all the time. And also I think what your book showed was actually there was still a dip in relationship satisfaction. The things that people were good at that made that not as bad, it was all about communication and how you responded to the other person's discomfort, and how good were you at kind of reading them and talking to them around those things. That's a really
100%.
interesting takeaway, isn't it? We've got to work on our communication before we have a kid.
Absolutely. If you are the kind of person that holds on to resentments and simmers and explodes, that's not going to be a great style when you're up in the middle of the night with a baby. So figuring out how to proactively air out hot button issues before everybody is overwhelmed by them, having check-in conversations, having, like I said, open lines of communication. I think all of that can prevent problems from getting more severe.
Are you experiencing some of the arguments, resentment, and tension we talk about on this podcast? One of the problems with traditional couples therapy is that it often becomes character-based. But if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that a lot of the problems couples face after having children aren't really about bad people. They're structural. They're about mental load, invisible labor, unclear expectations, and the pressures of modern parenting. The truth is, we're all having the same arguments. I work with couples in online coaching sessions to help untangle some of these patterns. This isn't therapy. Think of it more like a business meeting where we look at systems and say, this part isn't functioning properly. What are we going to change? Rather than, this business is failing because the people in it are lazy or rubbish. So if you're interested in blame-free couples coaching and would like to book a free 15-minute consultation call, email me at beahappierparent@gmail.com. So part of this piece around dads awkwardly finding a role is that it is, for me, it's a wonderful time to be a father. I'm really thrilled that I became a father at the time I have. And it's also a really confusing one, which is what you open with. Like, what do dads do? We keep seeing I keep seeing these things online that, mums cuddle and dads throw kids around, and that's what makes everyone happy. Like, what's actually going on with that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, so we know that fathers do parent in some distinct ways. And one of those ways is more active, kind of physical touch, like throwing the baby up in the air, um, chasing her around. And we see that kind of play even in primates, like in mountain gorillas who are playing with juveniles. So it's not unique just to humans. But, I say in the book, like, we shouldn't over essentialize this stuff, right? Like, if you see moms and dads play differently, that's going to be true for a lot of parents, but it's not going to be true for every parent. So there are certainly active, playful moms. There are certainly cuddly, affectionate dads. And everyone ultimately has their own style that works best. And what's really healthy for kids is to just have multiple caregivers who have different kinds of approaches. So you can just see the variability and develop more flexibility around how you interact with caregivers. So I was scrolling Instagram and I was really surprised to see this post that said kids reach peak oxytocin when they're comforted by their mothers and when they're playing with their fathers, because there is no study that I could find that actually had that data. What is peak oxytocin and when has it ever been measured in young kids? There's a little bit of evidence that dads play in more physical, stimulatory ways and that moms have different brain responses when they're more cuddly and affectionate. The study wasn't measuring oxytocin of the kids, it was measuring the oxytocin of the parents. That's one study that had 40 participants and has not yet been replicated. So we need to be really cautious when we essentialize gender roles in parenting, because kids benefit from getting hugged by their dads and played with by their moms. And there is no universal way to be a good dad or a good mom.
You also point out in the book that, like, that kind of roughhousing is cultural, and the Aka tribe, which we all love in all studies because they're the world's most egalitarian dads, and they have their kids on them all the time. They don't do it. And I really liked Anna Machin's theory on this, which was basically like, rough play is a really good, efficient bonding tool for men who've been at work all day.
Yeah.
It's like you squash everything, like trust and fear and going to the edge and bringing you back and security, into like a kind of 2-minute window, which if you were carrying the child around with you all day to go and hunt, you don't need to do. So it's a kind of response.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's like, how much of this is biological? How much of this is cultural? And the answer is it's probably both, right? There's probably a biological piece, and we can see that by looking at animal play and how it looks different in males and females. But there's also a heavy duty cultural piece. And, if you're the everyday parent who does all the hands-on care routinely, you don't need all the novelty and adventure. You don't have to be the fun parent, right? Like, dads can kind of waltz in and be the fun parent and get a lot of enjoyment and this kind of rapid fire bonding. But not every dad is going to parent that way. And a lot of that is, due to our own cultural frames.
I think there's this question certainly for me. Okay. I'll take music as an example, right? I'm a bit of a frustrated musician. My piano lessons as a child that had me crying every time, even though I was quite good. One of my sons is really gifted, and I have this kind of, how much do I push him to go further and push to the point where it's like, mate, sometimes getting really brilliant at something involves you doing stuff that you don't want to do, practicing when you don't want to practice. And then how much of that is, he's not you, right? Don't try and live out your unlived story through this poor child. And I just think your book really touches on this kind of question for men. And like, I just thought, could you read from the end of that chapter? I thought it was really gorgeous.
Whether or not you enjoy sports or rough and tumble play, chase games, and outdoor excursions, the difference between being a good dad and a great dad is knowing how to calibrate your style to fit your kids' own unique needs, pushing their limits, but also knowing when to back off and give space. That balance between attachment and activation takes time and practice to master.
Yeah. So basically, the reason I'm struggling with it is because it's high level stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really a difficult
It's really
question.
hard. Yeah. I mean, my husband also wrestles with this. He loves baseball. He grew up playing baseball. My son is good at baseball. But it's like, how much of a stage dad do you want to be? Like, he's a baseball coach and he really enjoys it. But it's like, sometimes my son's like, I don't really want to play tonight, or I don't feel like practicing. And it's like, do you push and make sure it happens, or do you give them space and let them come to it on their own? And I'm a trained psychologist, and I don't have a good answer to that one.
Yeah. Well, that, you know what? I think that in itself is just really good to hear. It's like, there isn't a right answer. We're all kind of constantly like assessing.
Yeah, we're all winging it.
Talk to me about this cultural shift in the way that we see dads on TV and the screen, and what that means for us and our fatherhood identities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we see fathers in popular culture reflects how we've changed in our understanding of authority. And as I was writing the book, I was thinking a lot about the Star Wars universe, because you have this really terrifying dad. You have Darth Vader, who literally tells Luke that he's his real father as he's trying to kill him. So he's like this fearsome, intimidating kind of authority figure. And then just a few generations later, you have the Mandalorian, who is taking care of this adorable baby Yoda. And the whole arc of that show is about how he's embracing his role as a loving caretaker, right? That he's like this tough warrior who kind of falls in love with this little creature. So it's like just in a few generations. And I was also thinking about the British royal family, right? Like you have William and Harry, who, enjoy braiding their kids' hair and taking bike rides, and they talk about being a dad. And then just a generation before, you had Charles, who was, affectionate but pretty hands off. And then a generation before that, you had the era of, sending your boys off to boarding school and, never hugging them. So it's like we've really changed our understanding of what the dad's role is and how sort of cuddly and affectionate dads are supposed to be. And I also looked at a cultural critic who's written about how are dads portrayed in sitcoms, like in comedy. And this image of the kind of like bumbling, hapless, inept dad, like the Homer Simpson, is kind of a predominant way that we look at dads. So it's like instead of the authority figure that we all reflexively respect, we have like this goofball that everybody can laugh at.
Yeah. And I think that creates a bit of a problem. Like, because if you look at kind of Alison Daminger's divide between the kind of superhero mum and the bumbler dad, there's something in that bumbler dad thing which is nice and gentle and a reaction to this stern hyper competent authoritarian figure. It's like there's something childish in it, which is very annoying for mums, but there's also a softness in that childishness, which is there for a which is well, it's there for it's great for kids. It feels aspirational. I wonder, like, this is a big question. So feel free to be like, oh, I don't know. But, I wonder how much of these changing archetypes, or the change in the archetype, let's say, is down to a change in what women want from that role. There's this old story in Darwinism that basically, men evolve to compete for the affections of women. I just wonder how much that is dictated by women wanting something different at different stages of their journey in our cultural history.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. It's like, you want something different maybe when you're first being courted, than when you are getting ready to settle down and have kids, which is going to require a lot of energy and investment. So you want the sort of secure, cuddly, affectionate, hands-on caregiver when it's time to have kids, but you might be drawn to the mysterious, stranger, powerful, warrior type before that. And I think that's why, like, the Star Wars, like the Mandalorian is so appealing, because he is this like armored warrior who's also gentle and affectionate and caretaking. So it's like women kind of want both, and they want different things at different times. And I think as a culture, we're still kind of figuring out what is the right way to be a man. And I think boys are really confused right now because they've gotten very mixed messages. It's like the manosphere is telling them one thing, their feminist moms might be telling them something else, and the TV sitcom might be telling them a third thing. And we haven't really figured out what we want as a culture either.
Yeah, and we all still struggle with this. You show these studies where basically we're okay with girls playing with boys' toys, but not the other way round. Even the most egalitarian people in the world, not the ACCA, Dutch mums, right?
Yeah.
Who we'd
Yeah.
expect to be so gender neutral.
Yeah.
This part of their brain, this conflicting part of their brain, lights up when they see the boys playing with the girl toys. Like we're not comfortable with it as a culture.
Yeah, we still have way bigger prohibitions against boys acting like girls than we do against girls acting like boys. And I think it's because we see masculinity as like a good, as a norm that is desirable, being ambitious, being competitive, being individualistic, all of that we celebrate. We don't necessarily see the more traditionally feminized traits like caring for others, being connected. We don't valorize them in the same way. So, a big part of why I wanted to write the book is just to say men can be great dads, and they can be sensitive caretakers, and they can be full partners. And those are qualities that we want to celebrate, that we want to associate with positive masculinity, because we don't want a culture that only moves in one direction along the gender spectrum.
Do you agree with Richard Reeves that maybe the period for dads to do that is later on in a child's life? Or is that just too binary?
Yeah, I really liked talking to Richard Reeves about this, because I had never thought about this before, that he said dads should take paternity leave when their kids are teenagers, because there's a lot you can do as a dad to help your kid learn how to drive or take trips with them. There are really valuable ways that you can step up, that it's a little harder in those first few years when it feels a little bit more like mom's show. And I think his point wasn't that every dad needs to be most engaged when he's got teens. I think his point is more like, we don't want to bench dads. Like he said, like, let's not discourage men from fully participating in parenthood just because different stages feel more or less comfortable for them. Like there are a lot of ways to show up as a dad, and there are a lot of windows in which you can be the best dad you can be. So if you're someone who really struggles in the first year postpartum because you don't feel the same connection with your baby as maybe your partner does, that doesn't mean that you're a bad dad. It means that maybe your time to shine is gonna be when you're walking your kid to school in a few years. You know, everybody sorta has a different window that really resonates with them, and I think that's true of moms too. A lot of moms are hard on themselves for not enjoying the toddler years. I know for me, I love having teens because my kids are so interesting these days. So it's like and my own mom used to tell us that, like, she liked it when we could come home and talk to her about what we were doing in school. So, you know, we all sort of resonate, I think, with different stages in a kid's life, but we want to feel confident that we can be there in a meaningful way at different times along that span.
You know what? It's so important to tell mums. Sorry, that is such an important message for mums. My wife is still angry with every person who said to her, "You'll miss it. I know it feels like a stress, but you'll miss it." She's like, "I fucking don't." Like she's like, "I like it much more now. That wasn't fun. That was really, really hard, and I loved them, but that wasn't the enjoyable bit." But you're right, everyone is different, but that's so much pressure to like all the bits of it.
Mhm.
And I think I think it is, you know, it's still much more okay to grumble as a father. It's getting less okay, but it's still much more okay to just call it out and be like, it's a bit of shit, isn't it? This bit, like, than it is to do that as a mum. That's
Yeah.
just not fair.
Yeah. No, I think we expect moms to love every second. And I know for me, like after my babies were born, it took me a minute to wrap my head around it. Like I didn't feel the immediate bond that everyone talks about. And you start wondering, is there something wrong with me? And I think you just need to be patient with yourself, whether you're a mom or a dad.
There's this piece around the changing role of dads and and man the nurturer, and there's this thing about our boys and the mixed messages we give them about masculinity, and are still not feeling quite comfortable with this men caring thing. You know, I think your point, more talks with Richard Reeves about him being so gutted that really in his lifetime the amount of men going into caring roles has not changed. I kind of feel like this is kind of which has to come first. I feel like the status of caring roles will go up when more men do it, and then more men will do it because the status has gone up. Like, how do we teach our kids to care, that it's cool, that it's like an aspirational thing to be doing, is to be looking after other people? Like, we've overdone it with mums, and they're just judged on how much they care. But how do we teach boys that it's a
Yeah, I
good
think
thing?
this is the $1,000,000 question, right? How do we teach boys and men how to care? How do we value care as something that both men and women can do? And I agree. I think the sneaky secret is get men into caring roles, and culturally, societally, we will value them more because we know that as men enter a profession, salaries tend to go up, prestige tends to go up. You can look at computer science. Used to be female dominated in the early days. The first coders were women. And it was only after personal computers were marketed to boys in the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden you got the stereotype of the nerdy male computer programmer, salaries skyrocketed. So we do something similar with men and teaching, or men and coaching, men as caregivers, as nannies. Like, let's pay teachers a lot. That's a great way to get men interested, right? And we know actually, if you look at teacher pay across different countries, the countries that have the highest teacher pay also have the most gender equity in the profession. So it's partially because we underpay that we've allowed these professions to become totally feminized. And it's a big problem because young boys benefit from male teachers and from role models and from coaches and from clergy people and from social workers who are male, from therapists who are male. And we're sort of missing the experience of half the population. So we need to start caring about care as a society. And we need to think about how do we raise boys and girls to really value, it's not embarrassing or weird for a boy to hold a doll or to want to play with a tea set. Those are the kinds of toys that actually teach communication and social sensitivity. And those are the qualities increasingly in a world of AI that you actually need to succeed in the workplace, right? You need to know how to work in teams and communicate well. Just being good at coding is no longer good enough to earn you a great living.
Yeah, you had that guy in the book being like, yeah, I went back to work and was a better employee because I'd taken this time. I knew how to manage people. I knew I got more. Yeah, we need to start rewarding care gaps in CVs because we understand we're getting something back with someone better back, right?
Yes, yes. Like you've got new skills now that are really valuable and transferable to the workplace. Exactly.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Darby's book is Dad Brain, The New Science of Fatherhood and How It Shapes Men's Lives. You can find Darby on Instagram at Darby Saxbe, PhD. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Be a Happier Parent. Full videos of these episodes are on YouTube at Alex in Dadland. And if you're interested in coaching, please email me at beahappierparent@gmail.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast, and I will see you all soon.